All right, this evening we're talking about the right tree in the right place. And since we just did the planting this week, this is the part that you should be doing before you pick up the shovel. But we've got this down so that we give you not only the information, but we'll have some exercises at the end where you'll need to be thinking about what tree would you plant there. And we started this presentation, I think probably 8 years ago or 10 years ago, and various tree stewards have done it over the years because we started it with Arlington County has a tree canopy fund that tree stewards are very involved in. And so that's what Kate's going to be talking about. So Kate, I'm going to turn it over to you to guide us through this.
Okay, thank you, Nora. Yeah, I'm Kate Donohue. I took the training back in 2006. And over the years, I have done various things, volunteering with tree stewards. But for the last several years, especially, I've gotten more and more involved in the Tree Canopy Fund and basically just kind of being kind of one of the people that are called on to go visit people at their homes and tell them what they should be planting in their yards. And it's really a lot of fun. So I encourage you to kind of dive into this. I know it can be very intimidating when you're asked to make a recommendation, but it's just like anything else. The more you look at trees, the more you study them, the more you observe them, the more you kind of like look online and check in your books and your resources about different types of trees, the more you know. And after this presentation tonight, I guarantee you will know more than just about anybody you're going to be talking to. So, fake it until you make it, right? So this is right tree, right place. And you do not want to mess this up for the simple reason that if you plant a tree in the wrong place, then it is going to struggle and it might not make it. Whereas if you can get the right tree in the right place, even if we have some difficulties in terms of climate, in terms of urban issues and difficulties, that tree is going to have a much better chance of not only surviving, but thriving. So why is this important? Why do we spend so much time on right tree, right place? And tree stewards really do put a lot of effort into this. First, it's the health of the tree. Here's this, I love this picture because you're going along and this, I realize this isn't a tree, it's a bunch of shrubs, but it's like the bottom of these shrubs are all brown. And the reason for that is because in the wintertime, it's next to a sidewalk. Somebody's going along with a snow blower and then probably with something with a chemical or salt to make sure there's no ice on the sidewalk. It's getting on those shrubs and it's killing all the branches on the bottom. So when you see something like this, it's like, maybe next to the sidewalk, that's not what you want. You need to look at that. Another thing, when you get into pests and diseases, you'll see a lot of these things. And it's like, if you've got a whole row of, say, eastern cedars that are dying, chances are it's something in the soil. It could be something environmental like this. If you've got just one or a couple with something like this, you can start to figure out what might be going on with those trees. Down here with the dogwood, this is dogwood and anthracnose. I'm sure, have you had diseases yet?
Next week.
Next week, okay.
Next week with
I'm sure you're going to be talking about. It's a disease that attacks our native dogwoods. Dogwoods actually are native and they can do really well here. And there are a couple of resistant varieties, but it's really, really helpful if you plant them where they are happy. And they are an understory tree. They don't like being out in the full sun. So that's one of the things you can do to help your dogwood stay healthy. This, with all of the squiggly lines, this is the result of the emerald ash borer. And I'm very, very sorry to say, but the ash tree is going the way of the chestnut. I mean, we're just not going to have any ashes left in this area. And it is because of the emerald ash borer. And the borer gets in, it kind of does this burrowing through all of the xylem and the cambium layer, which kills the tree. The bark peels off, the insects and you'll see woodpeckers going after the insects. I mean, it's just amazing. If any of you have been to Roosevelt Island in the last couple of years and walked through there, it's just incredible to look at the ash trees they're just stripped of their bark. This beautiful creature is the spotted lanternfly, and it is another foreign invader that we are keeping a close eye on. It goes mostly for fruit trees and grapes, which, as you know, in Virginia, we've got our budding wine industry, which could have a lot of problems with this. Its host plant, however, is the hated tree of heaven, which is the most invasive tree I have ever seen in my life, and it's everywhere. So I figure if the very, very small silver lining with the spotted lanternfly might be that it takes out a few of the tree of heaven. Down here, what I was trying to show here is urban conditions, and this is compaction. Obviously, we've got things driving through here, and it is compacting that soil so that the roots are not getting the oxygen, they're not getting the water they need. It's just an extremely tough environment. So for all of this types of reasons, we care about the health of the tree. We're going to try to find a spot for that tree where it's got the best chances of having a healthy life. We got the beauty of the tree, and how many of times do you see this? And it's just so sad when you see trees planted under power lines and they just do the chopping out all the branches and leaving them. Power lines are a real problem here when you live in a place like Arlington County. Every street, one side has power lines running through it, and it really limits the options and what you can do in terms of planting trees. But there are a few things that you might be able to do, and we will be talking about that. I think planned obsolescence. This was actually in Glasgow, and I could not believe that they basically were just piling this asphalt against the roots of the tree. How these trees were surviving at all, I could not understand because of the way they are. They just have no water, no oxygen, or anything else. And they were kind of struggling. But also, this is for street trees, but it's also if you're talking to somebody and they let you know, oh, well, next year we're going to be putting in a deck, or we're going to be adding that addition to the kitchen, or we're going to be doing something like that. Don't plant your trees until the construction is done. Find out what is happening with that property in the immediate future, or what the plans might be, because you might be surprised that people will go and plant trees and then think they're going to, do that addition or put up that deck or whatever they're planning to do, and that it won't affect that tree, and it absolutely will. So those are good questions to ask. You want to avoid damage that the tree roots can do. This is on Wilson Boulevard, and these are willow oaks that they planted in this really very narrow little, like foot and a half, whatever it is, strip between the sidewalk and the road. And every single one of those willow oaks now has huge tree roots that have buckled up the sidewalk, and you can see where it's cracked the sidewalk. So this is also something that you don't want to do. It would have been much better, even though it wasn't county property, but this is a Sunrise retirement home, if you had planted the willow oaks over here on this side of the sidewalk, but that didn't happen. Avoid invasives. Invasives very often will jump in and grow when you have disturbances. So when you have construction, when you have ditches, when you have road work being done, very often the plants that are going to come in and colonize those areas, if there's invasives around, they will take advantage of that and jump right in. And what you're seeing here is good old tree of heaven. And this is a Chinese import. It grows extremely quickly. Its roots it goes down and then the roots spread out. So even when you pull it up, and it's one of these trees, and if you've ever done this, you've noticed the smell. It smells like, to me, like rancid peanut butter. The roots will break off. And so then in a little while, you notice you actually have two of them coming up. They're just ghastly to try to get rid of. And they spread like mad. So we want to avoid invasives at all costs. I don't think anybody is actually out there planting tree of heaven, although somebody must have been at some point, but I haven't seen it in the trade. But we certainly do have other invasive trees, and we'll talk about these in a little more detail later, that some of them are really quite lovely and people like them, but it is important to really discourage people to plant these because we've got enough problems without getting all the invasives in. Another thing to look at that is a positive is that you can conserve quite a bit of energy if you plant your trees in the right spot. So in this particular diagram, we're showing evergreens that are being planted along the north side of the house that shelters it from the wind in the winter. And the deciduous trees are planted in the southwest and the southeast corners, and they provide shade in the summer. And a lot of people now are getting solar panels. And one of the questions that we often get is, well, what about my solar panels? And the thing is, if you have your trees situated in the right spots, you can get the advantage of the shade in the summer. And then when it drops the leaves in the winter, you're getting that sun when you really need it on your panel. So there are ways that you can place your trees that it will not negatively impact your ability to use your solar to the best that you can. And they can actually work hand in hand. So what impacts urban trees the most? And this is something that if you live in an urban area and if you start going to conferences, you really realize that the people who live way out in rural areas have a completely different view and are dealing with completely different issues than those of us who are living in urban areas. So for us, the biggest impact is made by humans, and it's not enough to know what the tree does. You got to know what the humans should want. So the first thing that people will ask you, if you're tabling someplace or if anybody your neighbors find out you're a tree steward, they're going to say, what tree should I plant? And the answer is a crepe myrtle. Just joking. Just because they're so ubiquitous and they are lovely and they have a lot going for them, but they're not native. They do nothing for wildlife. They certainly do have, they can, but they're not invasive. So I'm not going to diss the crepe myrtles, but we are so lucky in this area. We have such an incredible amount of diversity and so many gorgeous native trees that I think that we can be a lot more creative in some of the trees that we plant. So it's not just crepe myrtles that you can plant. So the question to ask in return when people ask you what kind of tree should I plant is, what do you want from your tree, right? So people have all kinds of things. They want flowers, they want to attract wildlife, they want something to look at in the winter, they want something that's going to shade where their patio is so they don't fry in the summertime. A lot of people want screening from the street often or from their neighbors. They want a tree because it reminds them of their childhood. They want something to hide the air conditioner. Often they'll want something that's going to grow fast. They don't want to wait for a tree to grow. They want something that's going to be there quickly in a couple of years. And very often they will say, I want one that does not make a mess. And sometimes it's kind of you realize after you answer questions that what they really want is like a telephone pole or something, because all trees are going to make some kind of mess. But there's no question that some trees are a lot more messy than others. So these are all reasons that people will give you. And this, I credit Nora with this, because she calls this the shark attack syndrome of large trees. And every time that we have a storm and I turn on the news and you'll see some tree fell on somebody's house or their car or something like this. And it's like, oh no, all of a sudden people are worried, and you just know, it's like you can see it in your neighborhood. Perfectly good large trees start being cut down because people are afraid. They're afraid it's going to fall down on their house, their neighbor's house, the street. They just worry about it. They just think it's a danger all of a sudden. And the reason it's called the shark attack syndrome is that if you were a reporter and people were lined up and trying to get into the parking lot so they could get to the beach, and if you went from car to car and asked them, what is the biggest danger that you could possibly be facing? And they'll say, oh, it could be a shark attack. And nobody, hardly ever does anybody ever get attacked by a shark. You really should be worried that you're going to get run over by somebody when you're, going to get your icy or something like that, because that is much more likely to happen. Or that you're going to lie out in the sun and get sun poisoning or something along those lines. And this is the kind of idea that we get with the large trees. And the other thing that Nora would often say is that everybody wants a large canopy tree, but they want it in their neighbor's yard, not in theirs. And I think there's some truth to that as well. So one of the things that we have done, and if you haven't seen it, I'm sure you will, but we worked a few years ago on something called the Mature Tree Campaign. And the whole idea is to try to educate people on the value of their mature canopy trees. And I think this is more important than ever right now, because we are losing canopy. We've got a lot of development. We've got, a lot of our trees are older and they're just declining because of the age that they are. And, we need to keep our big canopy trees that are healthy. And so trying to get people to understand the value and to at least encourage them to get an arborist in to look at their tree before they just decide, no, it's too big of a risk that they have to cut it down. So this is some of the things that we talk about to people with trees too. And I think also when you talk to people about what kind of tree do they want, they will often say they want a little tree like a dogwood or a redbud or something like that, because they're afraid of the big canopy trees. And so this is just one of those kind of conversations that you learn to have with people. And you might not change their minds, but at least you can, get them to think about it a little bit. And maybe some people will be encouraged to go ahead and plant that large canopy tree. Do we have any questions so far? You're on mute. Eric, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, so there was one question here. Does
Yeah.
emerald ash borer attack other species of trees too?
That is a really interesting question. They're obliterating the ashes. I have not heard that they attack other types of trees. Several years ago, the Virginia fringe tree, also called like old man's beard, it's a smaller understory type tree, and it gets these really cool, like strappy white flowers. And that's why it's called old man's beard, because they just kind of hang down from this tree. And it's really, a lovely little understory tree. And I had not realized that it was in the same genera or family as the ash tree. And there was some concern that the ash borer would go for that as well. But it seems like that has not happened. So as far as I know, it is only going for ash trees. But that would be a great question to ask Jim McGlone or somebody when you get to diseases.
And
if there's
someone
any
else,
more information on that.
and someone has asked about the lanternfly as well.
Right, right. Now the lanternfly, it seems like that is mostly going for fruit trees and things in the rose family, as opposed to our big canopy trees. So if you've got apples, pears, cherries, that kind of thing, then you may need to be concerned about the lanternfly.
Mhm.
And I'm sure we'll be getting a lot more information on that one as well.
That's it. Questions?
Okay, okay, great, thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so our philosophy is that we are happy to share our knowledge with our neighbors. We assist them in finding the information they request, but we are not professional arborists or landscape designers. So I am forever telling people, would you come, people will ask, will you come look at my tree? And I'm happy to do that. But I am always going to strongly suggest that they go and get an arborist if they're afraid that their tree has some kind of disease or something wrong with it. So that's kind of where we are. We don't want to pass ourselves off as knowing more than we do, or as being, professionals or experts in a field, where we're really just kind of like your educated lay people that are helping out with, with people. But it is good that a lot of times, people will be really concerned about things. White pines, for example, this happens all the time. White pines periodically just drop a whole bunch of needles, and people will be terrified that their pine is dying, and it's not. It's just that's just what it does. So a lot of times, when you've got something like that, you can tell people, nope, this is fine, and they're relieved, and it takes concern away from them, and it's good that we can do that. Okay, the other thing we do is we encourage folks to take the time to decide. If you're going to be planting a tree, especially if you're going to invest in something like a big canopy tree that could be around for, a few hundred years even, then people should really think about this. Can research their site, diagram it out, look at it, and where's the sun, where is the shade, how does it move through the seasons? You can do a soil test, look at photos, books, internet sites. If you're looking at internet sites, the .edu for the universities, probably you can count on that as having the best information. You can visit arboretums, better than a nursery because you can actually see what's going on. I think every tree steward that's been doing this for more than a year or two, and this could be you already, has a number of books on their shelves that they enjoy, that they go to over and over again. And I have like quite a few shelves, but when I'm out doing tree visits and advising people on what tree to plant, there are a few books that I bring all the time. And I will share this with you because I like them. You might be, not my favorite, but I just point them out so that you can start looking and decide what are the books that you might really like to just kind of grab on your way out the door when you're going to go see somebody. And I noticed this one, Your Common Native Trees of Virginia. This is a great book in many ways. It's great for just general tree ID, but it also just gives you a really good overview of trees that are native to Virginia. And because we're usually pushing natives, that's just a very handy book to have. Plant Nova Natives is a program. It's also an organization. If you go to novanatives.org, they have a whole website. And they came up with this book, which is very nice. And the whole idea was, and it's got everything from perennials to shrubs to trees. And their whole mission in life is to encourage people to plant Nova Natives. So this is a good one to have on hand. This is native trees, shrubs, and vines, and it's by William Colina, which is the New England Wildflower Society, and they have a number of books out. And this one is just really nice because it'll give you the picture, but it really gives you some detailed information about where these trees grow, what they like, what their environments are like, what are the problems with them. It's a and the last one, and this is the one that I literally practically keep in my car, is Durr's Hardy Trees and Shrubs. And he's got he's got a whole bunch of books, but this one is the first one he did. He's got another one that is specifically for warmer climates. And this book is not just natives, but it gives pictures and it tells you all of the basic information that you need: the height, the width, where it grows, what kind of conditions it likes. It doesn't give you, enormous book length levels of detail, but it does give you a whole lot of information. And what I like about it is I can show these pictures, because we'll usually have pictures of a tree from a couple different seasons and maybe of a leaf or a flower or what have you, is that you can show people what the tree looks like in different seasons. Now, you can certainly do this on your phone and you can Google it, but I just like books. So this is one that I enjoy quite a bit and find really useful. And I'm sure that as you go along and you start looking through books, and you're going to be like, this is what I really, this is the one that I enjoy using most. So that might just get you started to look at a few of these. Okay. Check the dates of your resources, especially when you're online, but also if you've got books as well. It's incredible to me how many things have changed since I took the training in 2006. So that was before Emerald Ash Borer existed. We did know about dogwood anthracnose, but the spotted lanternfly was not on anybody's radar. So especially when it comes to pests and diseases, you got to keep up with the latest information on this stuff. Another one that you might think it has changed a lot, but it really has. 2012 USDA zones. In this area, for cold hardiness, we were 7A. We are now 7B. And according to Kirsten Buell, the extension agent, we're actually closer to 8 at this point. So I've lived here since 1978. And I came down here from college, and the climate, it has definitely changed. It is a lot warmer now. We have more drought, we have more extreme heat for longer periods, and we have these incredible flash flood type rainstorms. And all of these are stressors on our trees and our other plants. And so things change. So the recommendations will also change. Also, we just have increased knowledge. And I'll give you an example of just in the last couple of weeks. I know that you have the pruning section. And apparently now, Melissa, who is one of the arborists for the county, the thinking now is, no, you really shouldn't be pruning, unless the wood is dead or there's some serious issue with it. You should just leave the tree alone. That is really different from what I was taught back, 15, 20 years ago. So there's so much more research that is going on, so much more that we're learning. So check the dates of your resources and try to keep up. Okay, height and width. Our jurisdictions here, we have limited space. And Arlington, most people have little plots. If they have extended their house and added an addition, or if they knocked down the house and built a big one, there just is not a whole lot of space for a large canopy tree. We also have many barriers. Overhead lines are one of the biggest ones, but we've got pavement, we've got roads, we've got sidewalks, we've got buildings. You have to look at what would fit. Study the Right Tree, Right Place from, if you go out to Casey Trees, to their website. The utilities will have things about spacing for trees from utility lines and that kind of information. There's a lot of information out there. I was looking at the revised tree steward manual, and they have a lot of really good information in that as well. This is the criteria that we use for tree canopy fund. 10 to 15 feet from main overhead utility wires and not underneath your smaller, the little wires that like connect to your house. I actually would say the more the better.
Kate, there was a question about what RTPT is.
Oh, right tree, right place.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah. I actually would, if you're talking about a big canopy tree, if you could get 20 feet away from a main overhead wire, that would be great. It's kind of like depends. Some of your trees are narrower, some are wider, but you don't want that situation like the picture I showed you where they're cutting out the middle of the tree or where they have to shave off half the canopy because of the overhead wires. So that's a big problem. We say 10 feet from any building, 3 to 5 feet from buried utilities, pavement, and fences. Now, if you don't live there, chances are you don't know where the utilities are. For tree canopy fund, we will recommend where the tree will go. Before they actually plant the tree, Miss Utility is called in, and Miss Utility checks out where all the utilities are. And if we have to adjust that, then we can. But if you're not doing tree canopy fund, if it's just your neighbor or something like that, you should always call Miss Utility, find out where those buried utilities are, and try to be 3 to 5 feet away from them. Also, fences, the sidewalk, if you've got driveways, try to get 5 feet away from them because the roots are going to do much better if they have permeable surface, which is not concrete. So the more you can give them, the better. And you also avoid having your driveway get buckled up or the sidewalks because of roots as the tree grows. And if you have other trees in the area, try to be 10 feet from small trees, 20 feet from large trees. Now, I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, because lots of times you'll be standing there and they're going to want a tree and you're going to be, I don't know if there's really any place to put a tree in here. And, we'll be looking at that in minutes too. A lot of the times, especially in Arlington, it's a matter of looking at not so much the height, but the width of the tree. So if we're tree canopy fund, for example, these are all canopy trees, but some of them are narrower. Your pin oaks are narrower than your white oaks, which are just very, very wide, right? So you might not have the space for a white oak, but you may be able to put in something like a black gum or a pin oak or an American persimmon, something that gets tall and has the canopy, but that isn't quite as wide. So all of these things, and this is another thing when you go out there, you might as well just invest right now in the one of those kind of big 30-foot, 20 to 30 feet tape measures and keep that, because you end up doing some measuring just to see where things are going to fit in on these yards.
Yeah, Kate, so someone is asking if someone is looking to plant in order to anticipate an existing tree dying, how close to the existing tree can you plant?
Oh. I would look at it and I would look at the tree that I was going to plant, because how long do they anticipate that tree that is dying is going to be there? For one thing, if they want to plant a tree to replace it that is slow growing, then it may not be a problem for a few years. But if it's fast growing, then you're going to want to get that tree out right away. I often, under those kinds of circumstances, if they want to plant it very close to it, I just suggest that they get rid of the tree that's dying first. The other reason for that is if you're taking down a big dying tree, the chances of it doing damage on a small tree that's close to it is much greater. But I would say 10, 15 feet, depending on the type of tree, maybe 20 feet. But if you want it to ultimately be a replacement, 10 or 15 feet might be okay. It really is kind of getting out there and looking at it and getting out your tape measure and talking it through and thinking about how long that bigger tree is actually going to be there. I will say this, for the Tree Canopy Fund, if you have had a tree that you've taken down and you want to replace it, you want to plant a tree close to that, where that tree was, we make you wait a year from when you took that tree down. And the reason for that is so that those roots have a chance to at least start to biodegrade. Because it can be pretty, depending on the type of tree that was cut down, it can be pretty difficult to actually dig the hole for a new tree if you've got all of these old roots around. And so that's another consideration. It depends on the type of tree and what kind of roots they have. Okay. Sorry, I don't have a more, specific answer. All right, this is actually out my kitchen window. And it's great because with all of this, I realized I can basically walk around my house and see every awful thing that can happen to trees. It's kind of convenient that way. But there is this enormous, and I'm not exactly sure what kind of conifer this is. I know it's not native, but it really is beautiful and it's very tall. And they were out there, the tree people for the power company, just basically shaving it, and it's always sad when they do this. But on this side of Wilson Boulevard, it is just a disaster of wires, which makes it really difficult to plant anything on this side of the street. Here's another one, the available space. Here, you've got 2 trees. There really isn't any space here to be planting another tree. Although some people, and it's amazing, they will have so many trees and yet they want to try to stuff a couple more in. And there are times when I'm just like, maybe some nice shrubs, but you really don't have space for another tree. There's just not going to be the sun that they will need there. And then here as well, you've got construction going on. There really isn't space. You can see, I don't know, is that a stump right there? There really isn't space for any kind of healthy tree growth in this area. And over here, these trees are just having a tough time as it is because they're so close to the sidewalk. Now, for all of if you've got a big tree, plant it 10 feet away from a building and 20 feet away from another large tree. I just had to take this picture and show it to you. This is our southern magnolia, which is an enormous tree. And they've actually, of course, the British would do this. They have actually, exfoliated it on this building. This has got to be an enormous amount of work, and why you would do this, I really don't know. It actually looked pretty great, but this is not what we would recommend as tree stewards. And I see this a lot. I mean, somebody will, especially if you have a tear down and they build a new mansion or whatever, and then I'll just wait for it. And it's like the landscaping crews come in and they will put a little southern magnolia, like it's a foundation planting in front of that house. And there's just no way, because unless you're going to do something like this, which nobody or at least I've never seen it done over here, that southern magnolia is going to start getting too big and they're just going to have to cut it down, probably at great expense, and then end up planting something different. So we want to avoid this. The other things to think about when you're looking at a site, this is really, really important, and it gets into all the other things. First of all, light. How much sun does the site have? Is it full sun? We have a lot of trees that like full sun. Is it part shade? We've got quite a few trees that can handle part shade. We have some very nice smaller understory trees that can actually take quite a bit of shade. But the amount of sun that is available makes a huge difference. And if you're dealing with buildings and streets and things like that, it may take a little doing to figure out how much sun that space actually is going to get. So if you have a tree that, I'm not sure what this is, but this one looks like it's been impacted by drought because the way these leaves are too brown, and it almost looks to me like this is an oak tree of some sort. But this can also happen if a say a dogwood or an understory tree is put in a sunny spot and it's just getting baked. It will not do well. This poor tree is suffering. It's got compacted soil. It's got right next to a road. So it doesn't have a whole lot of soil to begin with. It's probably getting salts in the winter, sand, all the other kinds of things. Clearly, there's drainage issues here. And so it can also either be drowning in water or not have enough. And it's just in a really tough spot. This is a beautiful spot. It's natural, but you've got the right tree there. Here's some bulb cypress. They can handle that kind of flooding. In fact, they like it and they are adapted for it. And that is the perfect tree for that spot. This is another one of these amazing things where you look at it and you just wonder how anything can survive in that kind of environment. But there it is. The environment's also important. Urban pollution. Some trees just don't do well with car pollution or the ozone or anything else. And they may be native and everything else, but they're just not going to do well in an urban environment. This was actually at Virginia Tech, and there was, it looks like there was a cross or something here. I don't know what it was, but this tree actually just grew up and absorbed it, and you can just see the two ends of it. So look at other things around. I'm sure you have all seen situations where trees have like grown through fences and things like this. And you kind of want to avoid that. It's one thing if the birds, drop the seeds and the tree grows up that way, but this is why you want to be at least 5 feet away from fences and things like that so that you don't risk that as the tree grows. And then this is a situation, Arlington isn't quite this bad, but we have way too many deer. And there is concern about that. It's been brought to the attention of the county board. I am sure you will be hearing about plans and asking for comment on various things that can be done to try to get our deer population back to something that is sustainable. But the deer will go through and they will eat just about anything. And so, especially young trees. And if you go out in the parks, we had real issues where we'd be out planting young trees and the deer would come through and they would just eat them down to nubs. And now often we try to get out there and get the tree guards on them. And you probably noticed them if you've walked around in the park. But deer are a big issue. So it's not just eating the young twigs and stuff in the winter. It's also when they try to rub the fuzz off their horns in the spring. And they look for young trees that are probably, I don't know, 1.5 inches, 2 inches in diameter. I mean, not really big trunks. And they will just rub their horns against that and it will scrape the bark right off. And it can kill, if they do enough damage with it, they can actually kill the tree. So that is a big issue. All right, so when you're talking to the homeowners, you're going to be looking at the size, the growth factors. Does it grow quickly? Does it grow really slowly? That kind of thing. The form and the character, leaves, flower, fruit, bark, all of those things. Also availability. Sometimes people want a certain type of tree and it just isn't really available. In fact, this time for Tree Canopy Fund, for the first time since I've been involved with it, we're actually offering a hickory, pignut hickory, which is kind of exciting. But hickories are one of those trees that actually has taproot and they don't transplant well. So you really kind of have to get smaller ones and they're not available very often. So, that was kind of neat that we were able to offer them this time. But if someone's got their heart set on a certain type of tree, they may not be able to get the size they want. They might have to get a smaller container grown one or something like that. Sourwoods are another one, sassafras as well. They're not easy to find. And when you do, they're going to be in containers and they're going to be smaller than, say, a big bald and burlap tree, depending on if that's what they're looking for. A huge thing is the maintenance. What are the watering needs? How does it handle drought? How much do you have to water? If you've got a soggy yard, if you want to plant it at the end of a drain pipe, is this the kind of tree that can handle having periods of a lot of wet or even standing water? What is its preferred situation? Is it an upland kind of tree that likes to be very well-drained soil where the water just kind of runs off? Is it a lowland tree that can handle that kind of moisture and likes it better that way? What is its resistance to pests and diseases? Pruning requirements. Pin oaks are a really popular urban tree because they're tough as nails. But you usually have to, we always have to prune them up because they have low branches. And you don't need the low branches when you're trying to walk under them or you're opening your car door or, what have you. So some trees are going to require more pruning and more maintenance than other trees will. The other part is the mess. Sweet gum is a beautiful tree. It gets fabulous red fall color. It's got really interesting leaves, but it creates those spiky balls. And people don't want those, especially if it's, right over your sidewalk or your driveway or something. Now, if you happen to have, a lawn out in the back and you don't care, it could be just the perfect thing for you. But, it's probably not the tree that you're going to want, like I said, right next to your driveway. Same thing with anything that fruits. The American persimmon is great. You probably don't want persimmons splatting on your car. It's just that kind of thing. Air pollution. Like I said before, I know sourwoods are not supposed to handle air pollution very well. There are other trees. Deer, once again, one of the things that people ask for so often is they want to have a narrow evergreen tree that they can plant for screening, either screening for the road or screening on a driveway or something like that. And they'd like, and we always try to do natives, and there really just are not native trees that will do that. The one that comes the closest is arborvitae, the eastern arborvitae, which is native. The problem with it is if you have deer, and many of us do, they like it and they will eat it as high up as they can get, which kind of like, kills the whole screening part of your evergreen tree. So that's an issue. Okay, this is where I go into, my thoughts on some of these things, but this is where I'm being a tree steward and saying, this is just my observations from reading and talking to people and listening to people. But I fully expect more information to become available. And I'm not saying I am the expert here.
Kate, just a question about the soil itself, the acidity of it. Does do different trees prefer different levels of acidity, right?
Yes. Here's the thing. I think if you are planting native trees here, I don't think you have to worry about it too much. We rarely are going to be doing soil tests. And I know I know soil tests are often recommended. And it's not a bad idea to do them, especially if you're worried that, there may be nutrients or things that would be necessary. for example, blueberries, which aren't a tree, but it's still a woody plant, and blueberries like things to be very, very acidic. So adding peat moss or other acid, hollytone or whatever it is that you're doing for blueberries, it's good to know that. But most of the native trees that we plant around here, certainly through Tree Canopy Fund and the Arlington Giveaway Program, are going to do fine here. It gets to be a little complicated because we're in an urban area and all of our soils have been mixed up. They have been dug up, they've been, amended, they've been put back together again. I mean, we don't have the original soils the way they would exist, out on a farm someplace. So that's kind of a tough question. I would say that if you're just flipping through a book, what we have here are acid soils, not super, but in that acid range. And many, many plants and trees, that's exactly what they want. But a lot of times, sometimes if you're going through a book, you'll find a tree and it'll be like, no, this likes limestone outcroppings, or this likes, lower pH. And usually those trees are recommended for like out in the Midwest or someplace like that. And they would not do well here.
Thanks.
All right. So native versus non-native. Native is the first choice for a lot of reasons, but the main reason to go native is that it supports the entire ecosystem. If you have ever read anything by Doug Tallamy, or if you've ever gone to hear him speak, then I would recommend it. He's got some really fascinating books, and he's got one out now called, which I have not read, called Oaks, but another one was Bringing Nature Home. And his whole, he's actually an entomologist. So he started studying birds and what birds eat. And, oops, I'm sorry. I hook up my computer here. And what he discovered is that native trees, especially oaks, will support enormous numbers of caterpillars for the most part. So, for example, I think white oaks is the tree that supports the most insects, and it's like over 400 different types of insects. Depend on the white oak, or can you use the white oak for their life cycles. So when birds come through in the spring, and even birds that eat seeds the rest of the year, they feed their young caterpillars. And it's some enormous number of caterpillars to bring a couple of chickadees, which is what he was studying, from birth, to the point where they're fledging and able to go out on their own. And if you didn't have the oak trees that were, supporting all these caterpillars so that the birds could go through and feed their young, we just wouldn't have the birds. And what they started doing was checking out all these different kinds of trees and saying, okay, how many different species does this tree support? And they found that your native species support so many, just your oaks, your cherries, your elms, your birches, all of them, but especially the oaks. I mean, they just all support an enormous amount of life. And it's the base of life, and all of these other animals in our ecosystem depend on that. Your crepe myrtle isn't supporting anything. So when you're getting your non-native trees out there, they may look pretty, and often, you'll see them advertised and they'll be, no pests and diseases. And the thing is, if no bug is on that, then it really is doing nothing for your ecosystem. As far as the planet is concerned, it might as well be plastic. So the more that we are learning about this, and the more we're understanding about how trees are really just the basis for our entire ecosystem, the more we push people to understand that you really should be planting native trees, because it is really supporting everything that is important to us. So That is why natives are the first choice. And like I said, Doug Tallamy, Tallamy, any of his books out there would give you a great, like, just overview of his work, and it really is compelling. I highly recommend it. So the invasive non-natives, these aren't necessarily terrible trees, and they may be the only option for a specific need. All right, so crepe myrtles are not invasive, and they are really pretty, and they're not really hurting anything. I mean, they're not helping anything, but they're not hurting anything either. When I say that it may be the only option, in some cases, it's like your ginkgos are really tough trees, and that may be just what you need as a street tree in that really tough place. My example of trying to have some kind of evergreen screening, I have hunted for years for, what would be a good native choice, and I have come up with nothing. So, I have a few camellias where I need something like that. They're not native, but they're not invasive, and they at least, provide a little, birds can nest in there or whatever. So that's your second choice if you can't find a native. Invasives are discouraged, and some people just really love, they don't understand this whole concept. They just like what they like. And it can be hard to, talk to people, talk them out of their, need to plant an invasive. But we try to do that because the invasives are really difficult because they take over. And especially here, when they get into the parks and they will just spread around. And like, for example, there are some mimosa trees around here, and I live not far from 4 Mile Run. And I've started noticing mimosas because they have somehow gotten into the stream and they're now popping up along the banks. And you see this a lot. And once they kind of like take off and start getting off into our natural areas, it's not impossible, but it is such an enormous amount of work to try to get those invasives under control. And I know that you're going to be you'll probably have an entire unit on invasives, but once you start working on that, you just realize that you stop nipping it in the bud is definitely the way to go, because coming in after the fact is just enormously labor intensive. Okay, so an oak tree, yay. Your saucer magnolia, from an ecological standpoint, very pretty, but really isn't doing much, but it's not hurting anything either. Your Canopy Pear is just an unbelievable disaster. And this is one where, I had an uncle and he was so proud and called me up and said that he planted a Bradford Pear and he was just delighted. And it was like, I really wish you'd called me first. But but these, and this is an example, your Bradford pears and your Canopy pears, these were touted as being this fantastic tree for, especially for urban, suburban areas, because it had the beautiful white flowers in the spring, and they were supposed to be sterile, and they didn't have pests, they were just going to be great. And so they were planted all over the place. I just remember a few years ago, there was a whole line of them along Washington Boulevard by W&L. And they actually went through and cut them all down a few years ago. But now you look out, and if you're driving to Tyson's and you're going towards 66 and you look out and it's this time of year when they're blooming, it's like you just see them everywhere. They have just spread everywhere out into natural areas. And it's really, really difficult. I don't know, we'll never get rid of them, but they are really prolific at this point. So here's some of the invasive trees in Arlington. I would say, especially if you are advising a property that is next to a park, next to a stream. I mean, if you've got an area where basically you've got a road, a couple driveways, and another road, it may not be all that bad if you find a Japanese maple there or something. But if you've got, especially if you're abutting a park, or if they're in a place where seeds and everything can get into the streams and be carried off and down to other parks. Really important to try to get these invasive trees out of here. And I'm sure there's a lot more. One thing it is important to note here, though, that, oops, sorry, that what is invasive here in Arlington might not be invasive someplace else. I am convinced that tree of heaven is going to be invasive absolutely everywhere. But if you get up in Michigan or something, there may be a tree that just, you know, is a disaster here, but behaves differently up there because the climate is different. So that's also worth checking out if somebody's asking you the question. All right, dishonorable mentions. Leland cypress. These are enormous, fast-growing trees. And this is actually Ashland Elementary School. And you've got this parking lot, and you've got this concrete barrier, and there's Dominion Hills Pool on the other side here. And they redid this a number of years ago. And when they were done, they planted trees. And you can't tell from now, but when they planted them, you had a Leland cypress, a red maple, a Leland cypress, a red maple. So they alternated all the way through. And for the first couple of years, you'd have the green Leland cypress, and then you'd have the red maple with its beautiful color in the fall. And now it's like the red maples have been completely swallowed up by those. And red maples are big trees. They have been completely swallowed up by those Leland cypresses. They just get enormous. And I think that landscapers and contractors love them because people want that evergreen screening. They'll put them in the back of a property, but what happens is they'll grow really fast. The upper branches will shade out the lower branches, and the lower branches will die and then fall off. So you're missing your screening anyway. The best way to use these, if you were going to use them at all, would be if you just knew that they were there for a short period of time. So you plant your Leland cypress so that you have that screening. Then you plant something in front of it. So by the time the good, you know, the trees are going to keep are big enough, then you can cut those down. But that's an awful lot of work and expense to do that. And this is my neighbor, and this is a couple years ago, and he planted, I think there's like 3 or 4 little Leland cypresses, and I was like, look at these, look at these ones at Ashland. They're going to get huge. And now they're like up as high as the roof of his house. And that's just in a couple of years. They're going to be monsters. So that's the danger of Leland cypress. Others, silver maple. Silver maple has a bad rep because it grows quickly and it's an attractive tree, but it's very brittle. And so it does not age well. And it tends to drop branches and can cause real issues, especially with some of these more violent storms that we get. So you're saying a lot of your older silver maples, people are cutting them down, and it's probably a good idea in that case that they're cutting them down because they really can be a danger. Box elder is native. It's great if I see it in the parks, but it's really just kind of it's also in the maple family. But it's just kind of it looks kind of ratty. It's just not the greatest kind of tree for a lawn or a home situation. Lombardy poplar, I don't really see that all that much here, but it is one of these fastigiate trees. It's, you know, very narrow. The branches kind of grow straight up, but it's in the cottonwood family. So if you've got a female, it sends out those seeds. If you've got a male, it spreads pollen all over the place and can be an allergen. And it's just also a very messy tree that tends to, you know, can drop branches and things. So these are not trees that we would recommend. Okay, climate change. This is like the $1,000 question is what should we be recommending for climate change? And I think it was the I'm thinking of the bird people.
Audubon?
Yes, thank you. The Audubon Society. Years ago, when we first started thinking about climate change and what this might mean in terms of what we plant, it really got to be, we were like just trying to figure out how we should even be thinking about it. And I went to something put on by the Audubon Society, and they were saying basically, you should be looking at North Carolina. Look down at the Zone 8, and we're moving that way, and we should be planting that. And at the time, I was like, well, that kind of makes sense. But in the years since, it just isn't working out that way, because North Carolina is hotter than us, but it's hotter than us all year round. We're still getting some of the cold winters, the Arctic masses coming through. We're getting these, to me, the big thing is the rainstorms that we get. This is new, to have drought and then just have these enormous downpours in a brief period of time. Then we've got just the heat. It's just very different. So we're getting more extremes in our weather. And when you think about what recommendations would I make to plant something like a tree that hopefully is going to be here for a very long time, then consider not recommending trees that are at their southern limit. So for example, sugar maples used to be on the list of recommended trees. They no longer are, because this was kind of like their southern limit. And it's just too hot for them now. I would be looking for things that have a really wide range and that maybe we're in kind of the middle. So once again, things like your oaks or your white oaks, your southern, your scarlet oaks, pin oaks, Nyssa sylvatica, the black gum. I mean, we have a lot of trees, but you kind of want to be looking at those trees that can handle the conditions in a wide range. So if I'm looking and it says this is good for zones 4 through 8 or 5 through 9, I'm like, that's probably a pretty good bet for where we are now and where we're headed. I could be absolutely wrong about that, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about now, as opposed to just saying, let's look at what does well in North Carolina or Georgia. Okay, so as you get into this, and it really is fun to study these things, how can you share your newfound knowledge? Well, one is the Tree Canopy Fund. And the Tree Canopy Fund, the Tree Canopy Fund is an Arlington program. The way it is set up is that when developers come through, they are required to replace the trees that they cut down. There has to be a certain percentage of canopy coverage when they tear down a house and put up a McMansion, for example. If they cannot do that, then they pay money into the Tree Canopy Fund. So the Tree Canopy Fund has several $100,000 at the moment. So the bad news is that all came from big trees that were cut down and were not replaced due to development. The good news is at least we have that pot of money so we can go out and plant new trees. So twice a year, the Tree Canopy Fund, which is administered by Eco Action Arlington, it's advertised and people can go out and they fill out a simple form to apply for a tree. We have a list, and did everybody get the list that Catherine sent out? That is the type of list that we have for the Tree Canopy Fund. And we say, here are the trees that we're providing, and you can pick whichever one you want, and we give you a little bit of information, sun, shade, wet, dry, fast growing or not, a little bit about the tree. And people apply for trees. Very often they will email Eco Action and they'll say, I want somebody to come out and help me decide where to put a tree and what kind of tree I should have. And that's when I get an email, and then I go out and I talk to people. And it's really, really very rewarding, and it's a lot of fun. and you help them decide what it is that they want. Lots of times too, and we're trying to do more of this, is to get in touch with apartment complexes and condo associations and that kind of thing, because they have a lot more land to plant trees. This is all for private land. So it's also your church, your synagogue, those kinds of things. They are also eligible to, and these trees are absolutely free. We, in fact, Thursday, we're going to go down to White House Natives in Luray, and we are going to actually physically select the trees that will be planted in the spring. And yeah, it's really a great program. And then Davy Trees, which happens to be the contractor for Arlington County, will go, they call this utility, they plant the tree. It's a bald and burlap tree, so it's a good size. And all they have to do is water it. And we even give you the gator bag. And if anything happens and the tree doesn't thrive, or if it dies, then we'll replace it if it's within a reasonable period of time. So this is a really great program. And there is a lot that can be done with that.
Kate,
Yeah.
I just wanted to step in here and talk a little bit about Alexandria, because I want to make sure that our Alexandria tree stewards know we haven't forgotten them. There isn't the same tree canopy fund in Alexandria, but I know that I think at least 15 of you are signed up to meet with Jane Seward and Lynn Gass on the same day that the Arlington walk around is happening, because what Lynn and Jane have done is just fantastic in getting their neighbors together to agree to purchase trees in bulk and plant them. So it's not done by the city. Instead, it's done by a couple of homeowners who just really want to get trees planted. And they do a lot of this as well, talking with their neighbors and stuff. So if you're really interested in getting more trees in Alexandria, make sure you talk with Jane and Lynn and find out how you can assist with that there in Northridge and do it in other parts of the city.
Yeah, that is what they did was phenomenal. It really, it was an amazing program that they put together.
Are there any Alexandria efforts to organize with the city to do something such as you've done in Arlington?
You should talk with Jane and Lynn about that. There's always political issues as to Alexandria does get money from developers, but it goes into the general fund as opposed to a separate tree canopy fund. So you'd have to fight that fight at the city budget level, but Jane can talk with you about that.
Thank you.
So those are big canopy trees, and those are tree canopy fund for Arlington. Like I said, it happens twice a year. We probably get between 350 and 400 trees planted a year this way.
So Kate, on the tree canopy trees, someone asked about aren't oaks having troubles here right now? Marion Ennis was asking that.
Yeah. This is another great question for Jim McGlone. What I have gone to a couple things because we were all hearing about sudden oak death and all this kind of stuff. And my understanding is that no, we're really not dealing with that kind of situation here. And it seems from the experts that I have heard talking about this, is that yes, we do have have oaks that are having some difficulties. I think a lot of it has to do with actually just the climate. You know, a lot of it I think is like the rain that we have. When you think about it, this is hard to, even when you're paying attention and you're a tree steward, it's hard to wrap your mind around some of this stuff because you usually are not going to see the negative impacts on trees for several years. So for example, if we have a horrendous drought one summer, you're going to notice that the trees are, not looking all that great, but then they may look fine for a couple of years. And then like year 3 or 4 or whatever, all of a sudden you start noticing that, the top of the canopy is starting to die back and that there are issues. And it's like, it takes a long time for trees to really show the impacts of the weather. And I think, so the drought is one thing. And I think it's that we get these droughts and then we get these huge rains. So for trees that just can't handle standing in water, they're more upland trees. They may have been fine on a piece of flat land for, decades, but all of a sudden when we're just getting inundated where we had, how many inches of rain that one June, it just it's rained every day. I mean, that had an impact on the health of that tree. And once again, it may take a couple of years before you see that tree actually dying. So then you start noticing these trees are dying. You're like, what's going on? And you may not be realizing that this is an accumulation of all of these impacts over the last 5 to 10 years. And I think that's what I'm hearing a lot is going on. And then as the tree gets stressed like that, then that is when your pests and your diseases and your boring insects and all the rest of it see that opportunity and they attack. And that's when all of a sudden people start realizing, oh, something's wrong, and this is it. Another thing is that a lot of our oaks are, for urban settings, are coming to the end of their natural lives. So when you think that Arlington was pretty much a Civil War encampment, so back in the 1860s and 250 years ago, it was practically all the trees were cut down for fuel and to build things and stuff like that. After the Civil War, a lot of trees were planted. So we have a lot of trees. Our biggest, oldest trees kind of date back to that time. And being in an urban environment, they're probably not going to live, more than 250 years. And so that's another part of what's going on. And then there's just also all of the development. So yeah, oaks have been getting hit hard, but I think so have other trees. And it doesn't seem to be, at least not from what I've been hearing so far. It's not like there's a specific disease or pest or something. It's not like an emerald ash borer kind of situation. People are still trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And they're looking at all of these different types of circumstances that could be negatively impacting the health of those oaks. And I really do encourage you, and I hope to join you when you get to talking about the diseases, because that is one area where they are learning more and more all the time. And it's just very interesting. And we have very good arborists who keep up with this stuff and are really great at answering our questions on that.
Yeah, Noreen Hannigan says that Rod Simmons sent out an essay the other day on the tree steward listserv about the situation with oaks.
Right. You did. I saw that. Thanks, Maureen.
Yeah, I would suggest that we move along and take this up with Jim McGlone next week, because I know we really want to get into the individual situations and practice.
Okay. So quickly, we also have tree giveaways. And I know Alexandria has one of these. Arlington does too. These tend to be smaller whips and containers. And it's not really, it's kind of like in Arlington, it's like a website, first come, first served. And people love to grab up their dogwoods and their redwoods and redbuds and things like that. But tree stewards do help actually be there and tell them how to plant and provide information to people when they're picking up their trees. So we do that. And there's also just tabling at farmers markets, at home shows, the county fairs, those kinds of things. And in fact, I am doing a couple of tabling activities at Westover Library, and I'll be sending out an email. And if anybody wants to join me, that would be great. I'm also going to be doing a couple of tree walks. Somehow I seem to have gotten into the Arlington Library tree walk. So I've committed to doing a few of those, and I will send that out if people want to join me on that as well. That would be great. Okay, so when I first did this, we were in person, and I split you up into groups, and I just gave you situations and pictures. And you had your list of trees, which Catherine sent out to you earlier. And the idea was that you would just look at this and say to yourself, okay, if I were visiting this house, what tree would I recommend? And this particular house is on Wilson Boulevard. She wants a shade tree that will shade the sidewalk because it's got no shade right now. And she wants high wildlife value. She's all about supporting the ecosystem. Now there's no wires because those are all on the other side of the street. So you got that going for you. There is a significant slope. So what that tells me is that you're not going to have a lot of standing water. This would be what is often called well drained because the water will move forward. That this house is facing north, but you've got a big wide expanse, but it is adjacent to a busy street. So you do have some car pollution. So the question then is, what would you plant here? And to me, I love saying stuff like this because it's not often you get a nice big patch of land that you can actually put a big canopy tree on, or even two. So,
Mariella Connor suggests a white oak.
yes. Yeah, that would be an outstanding selection for that. I would say also a red oak would be good. In fact, this is my neighbor, and I've been kind of after her to plant a canopy tree there. And she finally agreed to this last time. And what she went for was a scarlet oak, which is not on your little sheet, but that is also, it is one of the oaks like the white oak that will do well in this kind of slope, and it can handle the pollution, and it has really nice fall color. High wildlife value, I think it's going to be outstanding. So yes, but yeah.
Kate, can you tell us, sorry, can you tell us how wide is that piece of land? I have such a hard time judging by photos.
You know,
is there at least 20 feet over
Yeah.
to where that other tree is?
Oh yeah, I'd say this is
Okay.
probably a good, yeah, this tree is far away. You could probably, in fact, get two oaks. Stop it. All right. 1, 3. You could probably get two oaks on this.
Okay.
You could at least, she's going to get one, which is fine, but there would be plenty of room to get like, say a Nyssa sylvatica or a hop hornbeam or something like that later on, if you wanted to. There's this big saucer magnolia here, and there is some English ivy, but we're going to work on that. So there is enough room there. Yeah, this is actually a really good spot for an oak tree. There. All right, this one's a lot trickier. So this owner is looking for a tree to attract wildlife, but you got overhead wires. You've got really a short, flat area, and then a really steep slope. So you got 15 feet between the house and the slope, and the house faces east. So when I say the house faces east, that means it gets morning sun. When you look at your plant books, full sun is if you face west or south. East is kind of like part sun, because your morning sun is not as strong as your afternoon sun. So it gets, and I'm so sorry. Every time I move my mouse, I'm very sensitive. So, anybody have ideas of what you might possibly do or recommend for this? Do you think you can do a big canopy tree there? If there's only 15 feet?
So there's a hornbeam, a Nisa sylvatica, and a dogwood. have been
Yeah.
recommended.
And I hadn't really taught, I give you that list of the small trees because they are important, even though like Tree Canopy Fund doesn't actually do those. They do Nissa sylvatica. They'll do the oscar. We don't do dogwoods and redbuds, but those are popular trees and those are great understory trees. And sometimes that is what actually will fit. You might be able to put in a Nissa sylvatica or one of your narrower trees up here. I would go up here with a tape measure and be really look at that to see if that's possible, depending on what they really wanted to do. There may also be some space over to the side here that would give you an opportunity. It's kind of hard to tell from this picture.
What
But
about pignut hickory? Somebody? Mariella Connor?
you know, you might be able to get away with a pignut hickory there. Yeah. But you probably might very well end up with one of your smaller understory trees. A dogwood, a redbud, a Virginia, a sweet bay magnolia, something like that. So this is one where there are some options, but you really need to talk to them about what they're looking for and, you know, what would make them happy, because they want something to attract wildlife. Your dogwoods are great for that. They attract like 42 different kinds of birds, eat their seeds. The sweet bay magnolia has a lot. That's a beautiful little tree, and birds like that as well. So you could do some things like that. But this one's going to take more work and more like probing with the homeowner to see what it is that is really most important to them and finding something that would work.
Kate, could you
Yes.
say a little bit about why you wouldn't plant a tree right in the middle of that slope, given this is an urban area, whereas you might in a
Right.
forest or a woodland?
Right. This here is a pretty steep slope. So you might be able to, but you're close enough to the wires. If you didn't have the wires, I would be more inclined to say, you know what, we could dig out something here and even do a little terrace kind of thing and get a canopy tree. I'm so sorry. And get a canopy tree in there, because the fact that it's a slope isn't necessarily, you know, knock all the canopy trees out. Some of the canopy trees really like the upland kind of, you know, having the slope like in the last one. But having the wires right there makes it pretty much impossible to move that far down the slope without coming into contact with the wires. But if you didn't have the wires, and if you have a little more space, even if you have a steep slope, you can kind of like dig it out and kind of make it so it's a little flatter and plant something there. I planted a yellow wood. I have a really steep slope at the back of my house, and it did just great, and it loves it because it doesn't like this. It likes the water running off it, and it's doing just great. But I don't have the wires, and I have a lot more space. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Mhm.
Okay.
That's good.
This one wants fall color and winter interest. This is actually in a pretty deep depression. So water is going to run down and sit there. You've got to know that this is going to be wet. We've already got a willow tree, which is great for sucking up the water. There's a crepe myrtle over here. It's next to the Route 66 overpass on Patrick Henry. And this is the southwest corner.
River birch,
Yep, the river birch would be a great tree for here. River
Balls.
birches like it wet,
bald
and it has the
cypress.
bark.
How about the bald cypress?
Bald cypress would also work. And I think the bald cypresses, they drop their needles, but they turn this like kind of a real, I think a really beautiful tan color first. And it's a very, I think it's a really attractive tree. I think I can see where some people would be like, oh, I don't like that, but I like it a lot. So if they like that. How about oaks? Are there any of the oaks that you would put in there?
Mm-mm.
So we've got willow oaks and we got, and I don't think it's on your list, but another one that we offer sometimes is Quercus bicolor, which is the swamp white oak. Swamp white oaks are huge. That would probably be a little too big for here. But those are two oaks that like it wet, and they can handle it wet. Now I want to say one thing about all of these, the swamp white oak, willow oak, the Tula nigra, the bald cypress. The trees that can handle being in a kind of a floodplain situation like that, if they get enough water to get established over the first, say 3 years after you plant it, even if we get a drought, they will often do just fine. And the reason for that is that they are used to by having the water by being adaptive to having their roots flooded, that gets rid of the oxygen around their roots, which for trees that are not adapted for that is the kiss of death. But things like bald cypress and willows and those kinds of trees, they are adapted to that. So when you think about compacted soil, and that does the same thing. It gets, it stomps the oxygen out of the soil. So some of these trees that you would think would not do well in a dry, compacted situation, actually, you'll see them on the street and you'll be like, I don't understand how that bald cypress can make it there, or that willow oak. And they actually do. And it is because that once they get established, they're actually able to handle those types of conditions.
How about sycamore?
Sycamore is another one. Yes, sycamore, you always see them down along the rivers. But they're another one that you'll see them all up and down the streets, and they're not anywhere near, a river or a wet place, and they do quite well. So that's a great example. And they have beautiful bark as well. Yeah, that's the only thing. The oaks might do okay here, but they don't have fall color or winter interest, whereas your river birch and your sycamore and your bald cypress definitely do. Okay. How about here? 25 feet, mostly flat, full sun. And they want an ash tree because they grew up with one in their front yard. All right, you could plant just about anything here except an ash. And I know I have that slide where we don't tell people what they can do, but this is one where I'd be like, no, you really, really, really don't want to do this because it's just going to fail. But pretty much anything on the list is going to, you've got enough space. Often in these kinds of situations, I'll look at it and I'll be like, this is fabulous. We can actually get a white oak in here, or a swamp white oak. It's great. And they'll be like, I want a pawpaw, or I want, a red bud. And you're like, no, it's like you have the space for a big canopy tree. So sometimes, I'll try to convince them that, they really do want that big canopy tree instead of the little understory tree. And a lot of times it's because they're afraid the tree will get big and fall on their house, and you have that conversation. But in Arlington, in our little plots, if somebody is looking to plant trees and they've got something like this, I look at that as being just an enormous opportunity. All right, this is an interesting one. So he wants some shade. He doesn't want a whole lot of mess. This is a grate for stream stormwater overflow. It's in full sun, relatively flat, and there's no overhead wire.
Hmm.
So you want a shade tree. You probably want something that's going to be kind of wide. I would try to plant it where you've got as much space for roots as possible. I think a willow oak would do great here. If you've got water that's running down to go into the storm grate, and this is relatively flat, it probably isn't swampy because you've got the grate that's draining things away, but it probably gets a good bit of water flowing down to it. So I think a willow oak would do well.
How about eastern white pine from Mariel O'Connor suggests?
Eastern white pine. The only thing with the eastern white pine is they want shade and they don't want much mess. And pines will get enormous, they will get huge and they drop those needles. I always think of the eastern white pines. I like, because they can get so big, it's almost like if they're in like the back of your backyard kind of thing. I'm not sure I would put one here. It would probably do just fine though. If you had someone who wanted one, and that's what they wanted, I wouldn't object to it.
How about maple? Greg Kay and Tricia Gruce.
Yeah, a maple would do fine. Yeah. Now I will say yeah, a red maple would do great here. They like it a little on the wet side, and this is the perfect spot on a maple. We don't offer red maples on Tree Canopy Fund, and people will ask this. And the reason is because there are so many of them. And so Arlington has kind of a tree planting philosophy where they're trying to get, they plant native trees, but they're trying to get a diversity so that if something like emerald ash borer comes along, it's not going to wipe out half of us. And a few years ago, they looked around and were just like, we have so many red maples, you know. But if this were your neighbor and they were like, I want a red maple, I'd say, sure, go for it. That would be great.
How about beach,
Really are.
American? How about American beech? That was also suggested.
I think a beech would do fine here. Beeches, I love them. They have that fantastic bark. They hang on to their leaves in the winter and they turn that interesting tan color. They have, if you ever look at the beech buds, they look like little cigars. They're just enormous. They're really cool trees. They're very, very slow growing and they will get absolutely massive. And it might be a little wet for a beech there. I would do a little more research on that site to see. But a beech, if a beech would fit in there, that could be really great.
Yeah, I was thinking, I just wanted to make a comment about pines. I find that very few people in an urban area want a pine tree because if you think about it, our space is so limited and a pine will take over so much of the ground, especially when it's young, that a deciduous tree is almost better for many people. I mean, there tends to be a not wanting pines unless they're talking about screening. This situation in particular, I'd almost want to see their ground plot to figure out what's under there. I'm a little concerned about there being more pipes or something going from that stormwater overflow. Maybe not, but I'd want to ask about that and see it.
That's a good idea. Yeah, haven't thought about that, but that could be a concern. Yeah, so this is an interesting one because you've got a lot of different options, but you've also got some challenges in that space. Okay, now this I think is the last one. This one, as you can see, once again, they're down in a depression. They would like to have a row of Bradford pears along their fence because they like the pretty white flowers and they want to screen the bike trail. This is the park. So there are deer all over that park. So that's an issue. There are some high and some low wires, and the house is facing west. So what would you think about there? They're looking for something pretty to screen them from the park. But they have wires.
Mariel O'Connor suggests dogwood. Greg K, evergreen or natural bushes.
Okay, okay. Dogwood, that could do fine there. It looks like there's some shade.
Sweet bay magnolia. Too.
Sweet bay would be great because sweet bay magnolia is actually deciduous here. It hangs on to its leaves for a long time, but usually we'll get a storm in the winter that will take most of them away. But it is, you know, semi-evergreen and really beautiful. How about the serviceberry?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
How about-
they have, that has white flowers and great wildlife tree. Gets little berries that are like blueberries. If you can beat the birds to them and the cedar apple rust hasn't gotten to them, then that's
How about fringe tree or catalpa?
fringe tree could do really well. Oh, catalpa, I haven't even thought of catalpa. That might be a little big, but that might work. That might work too. Yeah. I would almost, if they just want to kind of have a hedgerow along this fence, I think that I would probably encourage them to just plant a bunch of different small trees and just kind of let them, you know, grow up into each other and have that be a screen, kind of like, you know, a hedgerow kind of thing. The sweet bay, the fringe tree.
Holly and viburnum.
Hmm?
How about holly and viburnum?
Yeah, you could certainly do that. I mean, we definitely have, when you, especially when you look at viburnums and the native viburnums at that, they are big. There's some of those are probably bigger than some of our smaller trees. You know, they're really in the kind of the same category in terms of their actual height and width and stuff. So yeah, you could do something like that. I would definitely encourage something like that. I think because it would just be really cool. It'd be great for the wildlife and it would be interesting along that fence because you've got to, you know, it looks like that fence goes all the way down that side of the property. So you've got quite a bit of space that you can deal with. And those are all things that would not get tall enough to really be disturbed by those wires.
Yeah, Robert Best suggests if you're going up a zone, a red bay magnolia.
Yeah, you could try that. I haven't seen those, but yeah, it's worth it, especially if you have a protected spot and you want to see if you can get that to grow. Yeah. All right. Could even do a fig. That's not native. Actually, I think that's on the, skip that. I think that's on the invasives list. Although I do see them around. All right, so that's that. Now, if you have signed up to be with Noreen and I on Sunday, we are going to be in Westover, and this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to give you a list and break you into groups, and you're just going to go to a couple of different addresses with your list of trees and everything and decide what on earth what would you plant here? And then we're all going to get together and just have kind of debrief and just discuss that. This gives you an idea, but it's really different. You know, it's harder with the pictures than it is if you're looking at it in real life. And we'll also get to look at, this is in Westover, and you'll get to look at the trees that are there. And for example, there are like garden type apartments, and there are along Washington Boulevard, it's just a whole big line of huge sycamores, which shows you what, you know, how they can survive in that kind of environment. They're pretty tough trees.
And the Alexandria group is doing something very similar. You'll be looking at a park that they planted recently, Tree Stewards did, and she's going to walk you around and show you some of the trees that they planted and talk about how can you encourage your neighbors to plant more trees. So they're both going to be really, really great. Put what you learned today into practice. So thank you very much, Kate. And I am going to stop recording now.
All right.